obviously. Scott Hall was in here once with us, and he did give us a kick-ass interview, but quite honestly, personally, afterwards, I wasn't too thrilled. I was like, what's this guy's problem? Anyway, he had some not-so-great words about you in response to your story about what went down with that Intercontinental thing. To sum it up, basically, he was like, for a guy who has a lot to say, he wasn't a great talker, and he was small, he's this, that, and the other thing. Do you have any rebuttal?
First of all, I don't get the small thing.
I understand. No, I don't get any. He's a great talker, too. What are we talking about?
I understand.
One of the best in the business.
I'm very...
I understand Hall is a tall guy.
Yeah.
But at no time, I was a little taken aback. Like, this is not a small guy. This is a big guy. This is like a guy you don't want to fuck with or fight with, right?
Yeah.
So... Yeah, so...
The problem was I sensed a huge amount of disrespect, and coming from a fan who knows what he's looking at for almost 45 years now, how dare you, first of all, but any rebuttal to Mr. Hall?
My rebuttal to it is my career speaks for itself. I came into the business when, my dad, my uncle, my brother wasn't a booker. I had no family in the business. I was taught to go out there and do it in the ring. Right. I worked my ass off to learn my craft, because you had to. Right. I said earlier, if I hadn't, I'd have been out the back door and some other kid would have been in that spot. But I've always loved professional wrestling. Since I was 6, 7 years old and first started watching studio wrestling in Pittsburgh with Bruno and Bill Cardill and Dominic and Haystacks and Jumpin' Johnny DeFazio and the Valiant Brothers and all the great...
The Wolfman?
The Wolfman, all those guys, right?
The Wolfman.
I love the Wolfman. The big X on the screen.
But I wanted to be able to do what those guys did. And then later, as I was coming up in the business, you see it taken to a whole new level, like, no pun intended, but the business on steroids, right? You see Randy Macho Man Savage, this colorful, larger-than-life, incredible talent. And you think in the back of your head someplace, I'd like to try to be like that, but you never were pretentious enough to believe that you could be. And then, something just clicks. Steve Austin and I, when I was doing his podcast, we hadn't spoken in years, and he asked me, before we went on the air, how long did it take before you felt comfortable in the ring? And I thought about it, and I said, about 7 years. He said, it was 7 years for me too. Now, put that in context. We were 7 years, 350 plus days a year, wrestling minimum 20, 25, 35, 45, sometimes 55 minutes a night, double shots on Saturdays and Sundays. So in a month's time, we were getting what these kids today are getting in a year or two. And we were in the ring with guys that were legitimate icons and future Hall of Famers and all of that. Just shut up and listen, kid, and learn. I just wanted to learn my craft. And so my rebuttal to Scott would be, by the way, we've buried the hatchet about as much as we're probably going to bury the hatchet. I'll never back down from telling the truth of the story because the fans, I think, deserve to know it. If there's, I've heard story, Sean say, well, he wasn't very good. Well, Sean says that, and look, I've said it a million times. Sean is, if not he's one of the great all-time in-ring workers.
Measuring stick for sure.
Absolutely. But if I can go and have a great match with Sandman in ECW, with Mikey Whipwreck in ECW, PJ in ECW.
All different approaches.
And what he says in his, because he's got this big thing that him and Flair, he's better than Flair. And all that kind of. One thing about Flair, and people know my differences with Flair, Flair could make a broomstick look great, right?
Good.
And so if you can't take that guy in ECW that has that gift of gab and can work in the ring with all these different styles, and you can't have a good match with that guy, then there's clearly a problem on one side of the equation. We were wrestling, Bill Watts was there, and we wrestled in Valparaiso, Indiana, Valparaiso University, in a dark match. And the place was packed, 17,000 people. And I knew what Watts was doing because I'd worked for him. He's in the back, glued to that monitor and watching what kind of chemistry these two have. And we go to lock up, and Sean takes a flat back bump, and he's laying in the ring laughing. Well, I knew Bill Watts right then had steam coming out of his ears. And I said, unless you want to get your ass stretched, you best get back to your feet. And he jumped up, covered about, take it easy, Dean, just ribbon, Dean, that kind of shit. Well, I don't rib in the ring, because those people, the 17,000 people paid their money. They didn't come to see a comedy show. They came to see two guys wrestle, two guys they've got a lot of respect for. And I knew Watts was having a stroke right now. So I came back to the curtain, livid. And it was the only time I'd ever spoken back to Bill. Bill, I apologize. I came walking back and looked at me and went, Bill was usually rah, 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 rah. And he just was speechless. He opened his arms like, what the fuck? And I said, I looked at him, I said, don't want to hear it, talk to your golden boy. And, and that just started this long litany of things. And the reason I think it hurt me personally at the time was in 1990, everybody in the WWF called me, Sean, Marty, and Dustin the Four Amigos. Where you saw one of us, you saw four of us. When we would go to Pittsburgh, I'd give the key to my brother's house, who was a set designer in Hollywood, and make yourselves at home, And Scott Hall, conversely, when Johnny Ace and I were together, we would always allow him to jump in the car. It was very rare, if I can't even recall a time that he ever paid for gas. When it came time to eat dinner, I'll just stay here. Well, of course, come on, you're going to eat dinner, right? And, stuff like that. So now you do that kind of stuff for me. I don't care if it's 50 years ago. If I'm in a position today, brother, I got your back, and it was just completely different up there. And, I was well versed enough in the business. The first time I worked with Scott, Bill was still there. Bill was there at the time. And we were in Lansing, Michigan. And I had been doing vignettes for about a month and a half, maybe 2 months. And we walked into the room. It was me, Bob Backlund, X-Pac, and Scott. And Bill was in there, and we walked in, and it was a long first aid room. And there was a gurney that Scott was sitting on, he's doing this. He's having a good old time. And Bill comes in and goes, okay, tonight, guys, it's Scott, it's you versus Shane, and Pac, you're going to be at ringside with you're going to be out there doubling for Scott, and Bob's going to be out there with you, Shane. And he stops, he looks at the clipboard, and he goes, Shane, what do you use for a finish? And as soon as he said that, Scott Hall went from this to boo-boo face. And I thought, dude, this is wrestling, When I lose, I don't really lose. And when I win, I don't really win. We're out there giving the fans a show. And that night in the ring, I had certainly been well versed enough in the business and taught by and trained by enough qualified people in the business. I knew when I was getting the lead ass. I knew when I was getting the stutter step to throw the timing off. And we were outside on the floor, and I went to pick him up to body slam him. And it was Scott was a big guy, but he's not like an Andre big guy or an Undertaker big guy. And I went to pick him up for a slam, and it was like picking a Volkswagen up. And so I looked on the post, there was a square plate. Remember the square plate that was right at the bottom of the post where it met the mat? So I took him and I slammed him into that, and I let him go to slide down to scrape up his back. And I thought, we can do this the easy way, we can do it the hard way. And it just was like this constant push-pull. And, I didn't agree with it then. I don't agree with it now.
Does he have big man complex? Is he like the epitome of that? Because it seems like if you're smaller than him, he's like...
He's got a jerk complex.
Oh, there you go.
I was.
What do you mean, an asshole complex?
Well, listen, I was... and I'm...
Because that's what I call it.
No, I'm actually quite embarrassed about this, because I was trying to hang with the cool kids for a long time, and I hung out with them, and I traveled with Scott. And I was friends with Scott for a long time. I actually brought Scott to work with me in ECW in 2000 in Poughkeepsie. And he's just, man, he's just not a good person. He's got a lot of issues, and recently, I in the past year, I've had some more negative. We're not friends anymore, and it took me a long. I always saw what he was, and it's a shame, because I had a lot of empathy and sympathy for him, because I've struggled with addiction and alcoholism myself, and he's had.
It's a tough road.
Yeah, but nonetheless, it's not. And he had a tough childhood, but it's not an excuse to be a dick.
Thank you.
And I know Sean, and I haven't spoken to Sean since 2000, Shawn Michaels since 2006, but I know Sean has at least attempted to change his life. I don't know how it is to be around him or work with him, but I know Scott has never changed. And it's a sad life. He doesn't get along with his son, Cody, who's in the business now. He's just who he's never going to change.
I've got another Scott Hall question for you. I just want to take a quick commercial break.
Excuse me.
All right, so back on the Scott Hall thing, and correct me if I'm wrong. I believe you were running the independent show, that infamous show where Scott Hall could barely move, that went viral.
It wasn't my show. We'd gotten booked on it. We were booked to work together.
You were there, though.
So
yes, I was there.
Where was your stance on that promoter putting him out there like that?
I mean,
how much of in the back did you see of him before he got out there? Did you see?
The whole time. He'd just come out of the hospital.
Were you amazed that he was allowed to approach the ring? Oh, were you just laughing?
Brother, I wasn't. No, I wasn't laughing.
Oh,
he had been to the hospital that day.
That day?
That day. He had still had the band on.
Okay.
When I saw him.
And he was there that morning for?
He was there at he got there. He flew in from Orlando. I got there around 4:00, and he was already. I guess he'd gone to the hospital to get medication, and he was already in the hole. And I mean, obviously, it was irresponsible of the promoter to let. I mean, it was an embarrassment. I was out there trying to pull it off too. I mean, I was messed up, but I was trying to. I mean, I guess I was just as guilty, but I mean, I guess. It was very irresponsible. You don't let somebody go out there like that. But at the end of the day, too, what do you tell the people? I mean, this is a small independent promotion that probably paid a ton of money to get him in there, and he's going to get paid no matter what. I guess. I mean, I don't know. It was just a sticky situation.
Oh, I'm sure he was getting paid no matter what.
But they should have at least.
Scott.
I don't know what you do in that situation, brother.
Wow.
Because then you have to refund money. I mean, it was just, just a shit show.
I honestly think you refund
horrible.
the money. It was horrible.
I can't.
But it was horrible for everybody involved.
Oh,
straight to the top. We're living this life, not just dreaming it, we're doing it for real.